Hi. So I just wanted to make some additional points to the readings from this week and tie some of them together actually through doing a PowerPoint and a little video of myself. So if you want to get your PowerPoint opened, the Similarities and Differences PowerPoint, and follow along while I make some comments, feel free. So one of the things that we start off with is that the idea that there are tens and thousands of research studies and articles written every year on the alleged differences between and amongst genders. And what I want to do is just flag some questions that we might want to ask as we're going through this course, and I would suggest in your life. In the other courses. And some of these will be repetitive from things that you've already done in the program and in your lives, and hopefully I'll add some knowledge here as well. So this predominance of differences amongst genders, it can be seen in like the $1 million best-selling books, the Men Are From Venus, no, Men Are what is it? Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. I actually did read good portions of it. That really talk about the fundamental psychological differences, the alleged fundamental psychological differences between men and women. So the areas of difference that we're going to examine in Module 5, like we're going to get into this in more detail of looking at these alleged differences and the research that's been done. But they're usually in the areas of cognition, the way we think, differences in communication, differences in physical abilities, differences in leadership, decision-making, moral development. Some of this we covered in Child and Youth, and you may have done in other courses. Or that article that I posted in Module 2 about this notion that we have to train our men and how to be good partners. I'll leave that. So again, just things to think about as we're moving through this. So question the research always, and this begins a 3-week exploration of research. Well, the whole course includes research and how to question research. So remember from last week, research and science has been used for eons to reinforce sexism, misogyny, racism, ableism, heteronormativity, to use those words, but the idea that heterosexual is normal, and is science and research has been done to allegedly prove this. And so just that idea, that notion that science and its priorities and its findings can often be biased based on the belief systems of that day. So that's what we did in the reading in Module 2, so I won't belabor that. But also from the first modules, one of the first questions I ask is, why are we even asking the questions of differences amongst genders? Because if we do challenge the idea that there are just two genders, or we challenge the idea that there are just two sexes, then how could we possibly compare them? See where I'm going with that? So because it starts when we ask those research questions, then it starts with legitimizing the fact that there are only two genders and there are only two sexes. So one of the quotes from Barker that I included here, which I thought was funny, was male-female difference as a primary organizing category for dividing human attributes and abilities is, I would argue, fundamentally a belief or prejudice. So she's going as far to saying it's a prejudicial question. Just as no amount of scientific evidence or logical argument can prove a 6-foot invisible rabbit does or does not exist, no amount of scientific evidence can prove or disprove the existence of inherent differences between men and women. So that's not saying that we're not noticing differences amongst us. That's not what's being said. what's being said is that it's linked to biology, and can we really know how much is absolutely linked to biology? Okay, so that goes on to question the idea of, can we actually study it? So I won't belabor the point, but the idea that science is unable to deliver truths or facts, the idea that we could study gender under this or sex as this. So what I mean by that, the slide from the author that I used is talking about correlation and quasi-experiments. So we'll learn about that in a couple of weeks if you're not already familiar. But that idea that you can hold a control group, so you can have absolutely with full knowledge that there is a man, and with absolute full knowledge there is a woman, and compare the differences. So you can't hold steady the idea of gender or of sex in order to be able to study it. Again, we'll go through this in a couple of weeks. Also, can we really separate socialization from biology? So the idea of at what point can we say that women are bad at math because of biology, which is what used to be believed, versus the way we've been socialized. I've already talked about that in the writing of this week, so I won't belabor that as well. Also in Module 6, we're going to explore these research findings, and we'll notice that when there are differences amongst genders, they're often typically really very small. But the way that our culture is, it tends to champion these huge differences. And so brain size, for example, for years and years, the belief that women's brains were smaller than men's, and that the conclusion then followed that we were stupider. Leave that for now too. And how attitudes and expectations that people have can play a role in constructing these differences we see. So the concept gender as stimulus is discussed in the Hyde article for this week, and I think it's a really interesting idea in terms of how gender has played out in the research subjects that have and observances that have happened during research. Then the idea that there are more, looking at research, that there are often more similarities amongst genders, and where the differences are found are within genders. So if anyone's ever done any work on looking at the origins of race and racialization, that there's more genetic and differences amongst, for example, the research says amongst Koreans than there are between Korean born people and African American born people. So the idea that there's more variation amongst all of the genders rather than across genders. Again, we'll get into that a little bit later, and I've provided references if people are interested in pursuing this. And then also the idea of the presence of gender difference does not tell us anything about the causes of the difference. So say, for example, even if we found that there is a difference between one group of self-defined men and one group of self-defined women, can we really actually know what the cause of that is? Like, some people will try to say that it's biological, others will say that it's social conditioning, even others will say that it's been ordained in some way. So how can we really know is one of the ideas here. And then the articles for this week talk a little bit more about the importance of looking at the social and cultural context of when we see differences. So I won't belabor that. It's in the readings. And then ultimately, why are we focusing on differences? Why is one of the questions I want to ask you to think about. Why is it that we want to find, not we necessarily, but our culture and our dominant society wants to find differences amongst the genders and the sexes? And would it not be more interesting in terms of building a better world to look at our similarities, and instead of dividing us further, why don't we explore more? And there's very little research done on similarities. So I'm going to leave it there. The PowerPoint ends with some suggestions of what we might do when we look and hear about gender and sex differences. So very much like the article, the Transforming the Debate article from this week, the idea that we want to look at the transactions of power for which sex and gender differences serve. So rather than, again, it kind of gets at causation, like why, if there are differences, is it because it's biological or because we live in an equitable society? And that the androcentrism question is perhaps more an interesting one. And then challenge the acceptance of work which uses supposedly natural biological categories. So if we're questioning the idea of sex, sexual orientation, race, racialization, then would it not make sense to then challenge the idea that they're naturally ordained? And then the idea of when looking at research or articles and magazines that we look at, distinguishing the difference between sex differences, research on sex differences, or what are they really studying sexism? So if, and I'm going to leave that at that. We'll talk about it. I'm running out of time. So we'll talk about that in the next couple of weeks. So I hope you're having a good time in the course. I'm always looking for feedback. I'm trying to incorporate as much as possible opportunities for people to talk about the words that we're using in the language. I know I've included some challenging articles, but I'm trusting us to get through it and share with each other. So enjoy, and I'll see you next module.